One of my first jobs as a trainee was to search up for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he had last been seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered off that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places she's found people in the past. I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main park area, though there's back roads you can take to get a closer look if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on a state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or a makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges. And if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on my back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase. In the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase, with beige carpet about 10 steps tall, but instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously. I can see the wood it's made out of. It's almost like a video game glitch where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there and it's like my brain is working overtime trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there, casually, looking at it as if it's at least the interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing out here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm. Hard. I wouldn't do that, she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't get near them, don't touch them, don't go up to them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere. And I find them only during the broadest searches of training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The bigger I ever saw, it looked like it came out of the turn of a century mansion, and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but the same response my trainer did. It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't close to them or go up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I'll get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet.
I previously tried to post on here with a few of my experiences rolled into one. However, I did not realize this broke the rules of this page, so I'm going to be posting frequent updates of individual experiences. The advantages to this is that I'll feel further inclined to include more detail, as each post will be dedicated to the specific encounter. However, many of the following events happened years ago. Please learn from my posts as much as you enjoy them. I've been a park ranger in the national park that's located in the United Kingdom for just over 10 years. I'm not going to tell you which one, or even the county of which it's located, for the sake of my job, as I still work here, but there are some pretty weird things that you find every so often while on shift. Things that my superiors would likely not appreciate me sharing online. My job mainly involves patrolling the trails and checking that they're in a safe state for people to walk through. I was also asked to talk with school children in assembly and such. After about a year on the job, to express how important it is to stay with a group and on the trails, I gave pretty obvious reasons for this. But little did I know I would soon discover some of the horrifying truths as to why they should never wander off. The first story I'm going to share with you took place on a beautiful spring morning in June. This was during my first year on the job. The sun was still low in the sky, but it was slowly rising and brightening my surroundings. I was on a normal morning patrol through one of the deeper trails, as it hadn't been checked recently, and protocol dictated to frequently check all the trails for fallen trees and any potential natural hazards to hikers. It was such a beautiful morning. I remember walking along with a slight smile on my face as I listened to nature waking up in the trees, and I found the cool breeze very relaxing, and it had a truly peaceful effect on my mood. Suddenly, the trees to my left were filled with sounds of birds squawking loudly as they frantically flew away. I stopped and listened for a moment, and there was silence. A quote from another story I have read here reads very true to this situation. Prey is silent when predators are near. Now understand that we don't have any bears or wolves here in England. Nothing like that. So I suppose it could be a deer that had snapped a twig. However, the noise wouldn't usually drop like that, as deers don't pose much of a threat to wildlife at all. I continued on, not thinking anything of it, and after a short time, I got the urge to check behind me. There was a man walking maybe 100 meters back, and I was in a long straight, so it was easy to tell. I was confused, as the trails aren't usually used until a little later, when early dog walkers would show up, and even then, few would wander this far into the woods at this time. He seemed to be walking at a very relaxed pace, his hands in his dark blue hoodie's pocket, and he had faded blue jeans. I radioed over to ask if anyone had seen someone enter the trail I was walking shortly after I left, but no one had seen anyone come in or out, other than the occasional dog walker. I thought nothing of it, but continued on a slightly hurried pace. I usually wouldn't be bothered about being on my own with another stranger. I wasn't a small bloke, nor someone to get spooked easily. However, this guy just gave me a bad feeling. I was approaching a gate that leads to a much denser area of the woodland, more like a thick forest, and as I closed the gate behind me, I noticed this man had stopped dead in his tracks. He seemed to be staring right at me, but I couldn't be sure. Then he broke into a sprint. Not a light jog that someone out for exercise might. I'm talking a full-on sprint. It was almost aggressive. I freaked out and turned to run. Why would a complete stranger, who was previously so calm and relaxed, suddenly be sprinting at me? He hadn't called for help or even waved to me. Fortunately, the trail's long straight section was over, and I ran round a curve and hid behind one of the many large rocks that were by the side of the trail. I could hear his heavy footsteps thudding towards me, right until he was just on the other side of the rock, and he stopped. Again, dead in his tracks. He wasn't even out of breath. He just seemed to stand there for a while, and then just walked off. I waited for what must have been close to 10 minutes to be sure he was far ahead, and radioed the strange encounter to my colleagues, who agreed it was strange, and I cautiously continued on with my patrol. I never saw that strange man again, and I hope I never do. I have many more memories I would like to share with you. Stay safe out there, kids. You are rarely truly alone in the forest.
A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the Goat Man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the Goat Man. We got a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails. and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife started screaming behind him. He runs back to her and she just passed out on the trail. We get her on the backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she just comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially what happened was this. She had been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded like sort of a cat, but it was off somehow and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over, just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him, and the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. And I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow meow at people, so when we get down to the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search to the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out what she saw coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone. So I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm heading back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow, meow, in this really odd monotone. As comical as it sounds, it was almost like the guy on South Park with the electrolarynx, Ned. I go off the trail in the direction it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's always like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out and I end up going back to the welcome center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard the exact sound again. I suppose it could have been something stupid kid or they're fucking with people, but I have to admit it was weird.